The name Uzumaki carries a lot of weight for horror fans, especially those familiar with Junji Ito's work. His cult classic manga is seen as a masterpiece of the genre, and many consider it to be his best work. Now, after many years of anticipation, a 4-episode anime adaptation is finally set to debut on Adult Swim's Toonami block later this month. This miniseries has been in development for nearly 5 years, with otakus eagerly awaiting its release the entire time. When it finally airs, Uzumaki has the potential to become a landmark moment for horror anime, as it offers a rare, must-see experience for fans of the genre. Uzumaki Spiral into Darkness is set to bring Junji Ito's eerie psychological horror to life through animation for the first time. Apparently, the series is making every effort to stay true to Ito's original work, even though it's transitioning into a new medium. Impressively, the show has captured the distinctive style of Ito's artwork by sticking to a black and white color palette to faithfully adapt the horror of the Uzumaki spiral from manga to screen. For those who haven't read the manga or watched the 2000 film adaptation, please do, because Uzumaki is a bizarre and unsettling story, one that's hard to compare to anything else. With the anime premiere, now Ito's work has the chance to reach a much larger audience, which is well deserved for a creator of his caliber. I think it's time we touch down on what is the spiral that haunts the very core of this manga. So, without wasting another moment, let's discuss the entity that makes Ito's best body horror piece so skin-crawlingly beautiful. Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request, however. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. What makes the Spiral the main villain in Uzumaki? The Spiral is a mysterious, sinister force that seems to periodically wipe out the entire population of Kuratsucho every few centuries or even millennia, but it does so without any clear pattern to when it strikes. It has the terrifying ability to infect and control the minds and bodies of people, animals, and even insects. No one really knows what the spiral is or where it comes from, though it does seem to have a kind of awareness, especially in how it repeatedly targets Kiri and sometimes Suichi, the protagonists of Uzumaki. It could be connected to the strange city of spirals hidden beneath Kuratsucho, but whether it's a curse, an infection, a living entity, or some other sentient force is still a complete riddle. What is scary is how the spiral has the mortifying ability to infect and control the minds and bodies of humans. In the manga, it's shown that only people who are cursed can actually see, hear, or feel the spiral, although Suichi Saito is the exception to this. But it has been made clear that the spiral only affects the town of Kuratsucho and follows a disturbing pattern when wiping out its people. It starts with random deaths and disappearances, along with strange cases of obsession over the spiral pattern. Then, things escalate as hurricanes and tornadoes hit, and eventually, the town is reduced to a heap of rubble. At the end of Uzumaki, Kuratsucho is literally rebuilt into a massive spiral-shaped row house, where everyone inside is eventually pulled into the unsettling city of spirals. In the 2000 movie, the spiral is portrayed as less sentient compared to the manga and mostly focuses on Kiri while also playing a smaller role in the plot. The pattern of deaths doesn't go as far as it does in the manga, as it stops at the first stage, where there are loosely spiral-related deaths and disappearances followed by a massive wave of deaths that wipes out the town. What damage can the spiral do? As you must have figured out by now, the spiral is an almost all-powerful and pervasive force, as it has the ability to control the minds and bodies of both humans and animals. It can bend nature and even the laws of physics to its will, which it demonstrates frequently. In Chapter 3, The Scar, and Chapter 20, Galaxies, we see how the spiral can grant humans supernatural abilities before ultimately killing them. In Chapter 20, it's also shown that the spiral can communicate telepathically with people, and it might even have control over entire galaxies, which is a subtle hint on how it could exist throughout the entire universe. And of course, it can also twist and deform humans, turning them into grotesque humanoid snails. The spiral also has full control over the weather, atmosphere, and air pressure within Kuratsucho, and even manipulates the ocean surrounding the town. In Chapter 9, we see how the entity can use stones and bricks to produce intense scorching light. From Chapter 14 onward, the spiral shows how it can effectively seal off Kuratsucho, making it impossible for anyone to enter or leave. Although, in the movie, the spiral is much less powerful than in the manga. It seems better at controlling people's bodies than their minds and doesn't show any signs of being sapient, as it cannot seem to communicate or affect human abilities. Unlike the manga, there's no suggestion that the spiral has influence beyond Kuratsucho, and it definitely doesn't have control control over entire galaxies. In the film, its powers were more limited in other ways too. It could manipulate the clouds, but not the rest of the weather or air pressure. It could only control the water in Dragonfly Pond, not the ocean. Additionally, the spiral in the film could not control animals or plants and only influenced humans. And while it did cause quite a lot of chaos in the town, it still didn't have the ability to trap people in Kurotsucho like it does in the manga. How does the spiral curse manifest in its victims? The spiral exists as an abstract force with no real shape or form of its own. Instead, it represents itself through spirals in people, objects, events, and natural phenomena. Whether it's in the form of a curse, a disaster, or an obsession, this spiral makes its presence felt in various unsettling ways. It's also immortal, meaning it cannot be destroyed and thus continues to exert its influence indefinitely. One of the most frightening manifestations of the spiral curse is mind manipulation, which can drive people to dangerous obsessions, as seen when it caused a man to become so fixated on spirals that he actively tried to transform into one, ultimately committing suicide. It doesn't stop at obsession either, as the spiral has the power to affect groups of people at once. The curse once made a group of pregnant women behave like mosquitoes and drove them to drain blood from others and drink it in a bizarre and horrifying way. The spiral curse can also manipulate sleep patterns, putting people to sleep against their will by manipulating snakes and mosquitoes to do its bidding. It also wields fear as a weapon. One chilling weapon of this is when it induced such an extreme phobia of spirals in a woman, she began slicing off parts of her own body, desperately trying to remove the spiral she saw on herself. The way the spiral curse twists people's minds and embeds fear within them makes it one of the most terrifying forces in the story. Not just that, the spiral also has the power to create terrifying illusions, making people see things that aren't real. For example, it causes Shuichi to hallucinate and see his dead father, blending his sense of reality with his worst fears. The sentient entity also has the ability to interact with non-physical things, which means its influence isn't just limited to the material world. Another one of the spiral curse's more disturbing manifestations is transmutation, meaning it drives its victims to change their physical forms. It once turned a girl's forehead scar into a spiral, which slowly consumed her entire head and body, ultimately making her disappear completely. I mean, the spiral can even manipulate something as simple as hair, because in one case, it caused Akiri hair to curl up uncontrollably, and that too into spirals, turning it into something mesmerizing that drew people's attention, whether they wanted to look at it or not. This curse can also manipulate biology in strange ways, as it has turned people into snails, with the eerie theory that those who walk too slowly may become snails themselves. In another horrifying instance, newborn babies were able to speak in full sentences after being cursed by the spiral. They expressed a desire to return to their mother's wombs, further highlighting the bizarre and unsettling effects of the infection. Apart from that, this malevolent entity has the power to manipulate diseases in terrifying ways. It can cause a rare skin condition where victims develop warts that eventually grow into sharp spikes. In one case, a man suffered for days as long spikes took over all of his body and face. The spiral can also twist and deform people's bodies, literally warping them into spiral shapes, which really shows how demented the curse can be. It even controls elements in bizarre ways because after a man was cremated, his ashes formed a spiral along with the shape of his face. Later, its control over air allowed it to create massive hurricanes that could pull people into the sky. The spiral can also manipulate heat, as shown when it caused a transformed lighthouse to heat up so intensely that it literally warped glass into a spiral shape. In a horrifying display of power, it caused people living in row houses to pretty much fuse together, with their limbs twisting around one another, trapping multiple bodies in a single cramped up space. On top of all that, the spiral can interfere with technology, even disabling cell phone signals and isolating people from the outside world. Oh, and it doesn't stop there. The spiral's power extends to manipulating water, as it can turn the sea into massive whirlpools that swallow people whole. Its influence over time is equally unsettling, making it lose all meaning. People who spent mere days in the mountains return to the town to find buildings and structures that should have taken years to construct, showing just how much the spiral can warp time itself. What's worse is that the curse can manifest by stretching the length of a tunnel endlessly, twisting it into a spiral, and even looping trails back to their starting point, making it impossible to leave. The spiral also has the ability to absorb people completely, thus erasing their existence without leaving a trace. In an even more macabre display of power, it can bring the dead back to life. One particularly disturbing instance involved a child who was revived and transformed into a living jack-in-the-box with his spine twisted into a spiral spring. Lastly, the spiral curse can also petrify people by turning countless individuals into stone and trapping them in their twisted forms for eternity. Is anyone immune to the curse of the spiral? While most people who come into contact with the spiral die within a few days, a few individuals did seem to have some level of immunity to its effects. Shuichi Saito is a prime example, as he could fully see and interact with the spiral without ever becoming contaminated himself. Others, like Kairi and Yasuo Goshima, were contaminated multiple times, but somehow they managed to recover. Even Mrs. Goshima was affected once, but made a recovery in due time. It's unclear whether this immunity is natural or if there's some sort of unknown factor at play. In the Goshima's case, it's likely natural since they were unaware of the spiral's existence before encountering it. As for Shuichi, many fans have speculated for years about why he appears completely immune, though nobody has been able to come up with any concrete explanation. Uzumaki shows you what going mad really looks like. So, Uzumaki is a short horror manga series that originally ran in Big Comic Spirits from August 1998 to September 99. The story follows Kairi Goshima and her boyfriend Shuichi Saito as they grapple with a terrifying plague of spirals that overtakes their town. People affected by the spirals are driven to madness by either becoming obsessed with the curse or horrified by the spirals themselves. Kiri, our protagonist, is the first person to encounter the creeping madness affecting her boyfriend Shuichi's father. During a walk to school, she spots him huddled in an alley, fixated on a snail's spiral shell. This obsession with spirals soon consumes both Shuichi and his father, driving them to madness. What starts as a disturbing family fixation grows into a larger, insidious force, spreading through their village and infecting everyone it touches. Ito's story weaves this creeping horror into the very fabric of the narrative, which makes you feel the same sense of dread and madness that overwhelms everyone in the town. Ito's artwork in Uzumaki is strikingly precise and is perfectly suited for the kind of horror he creates. The true impact of the manga's horror is delivered through his illustrations, which vividly depict the characters transforming by spiral in horrifying ways. Early on, one particularly chilling scene shows a whirlpool opening in a girl's head, pulling her entirely into it, which is a clear indicator on how Ito's horror goes beyond just psychological terror. As the story progresses, Ito's drawings reveal physical distortions and grotesque changes in both people and the town. His detailed portrayal of these physical transformations makes the horror feel intensely real and visceral. Through these unsettling visuals, Ito draws readers into the more subtle and insidious layers of horror that underpin his story. Plus, to make the physical mutations in Uzumaki truly impactful, Ito builds suspense masterfully. The story keeps you hooked as Kiri and Shuichi investigate the increasingly bizarre spirals, with each new development ramping up the danger. From swirling clouds and dust to people descending into utter madness, and from bodies morphing into snails to a dire shortage of food, with snails becoming the only option, Ito's horror seeps into your mind, just like the classic suspense techniques of Alfred Hitchcock. The real terror isn't just in the grotesque images, but in the tension that builds up to them. Ito skillfully teases out the horror, making each revelation more shocking than the last. Every twist and transformation is carefully set up, escalating the dread and keeping you on edge as the story progresses. In Uzumaki, the true horror is the terror of nature itself, as the spirals manifest in forms that should be familiar and natural. As Kurotsucho is increasingly consumed by these unnatural distortions of everyday phenomena, the town itself becomes the real antagonist. Unlike stories where the villain is a person with a sinister agenda, Uzumaki presents a more unsettling enemy with existence itself turning against its inhabitants. The horror here isn't something that can be simply escaped or defeated, as it's embedded in every aspect of the environment. Kiri, Shuichi, and everyone else in the town are trapped within this all-encompassing dread, making it a constant, inescapable presence in their lives. Despite the suspense and dread that Ito builds throughout Uzumaki, the story doesn't offer a big cathartic release at the end. Instead of a triumphant resolution, Kiri and Shuichi's journey ends in resignation to the overwhelming forces around them. The story isn't about overcoming these threats, but it is about the inevitability of defeat. In Kurotsucho, everyone and everything succumbs to these destructive forces, and Kiri and Shuichi are no exception. Ito dedicates so much time in developing their characters and exploring the town's mystery and tragedy, only for the ending to deliver a sense of morose inevitability. Kiri and Shuichi become just two more victims of the relentless spiral, reinforcing the story's cynical and defeatist tone. The ending feels preordained, highlighting that there was never a chance for escape or victory. Uzumaki is insidious, not just for the fictional horror Ito conjures, but how it seeps into the minds of its readers, because rather than focusing on monsters or killers, it's about ordinary people driven to madness. Reading Uzumaki is pretty much like getting lost in a dark, twisted world. Kiri and Shuichi's fears and struggles become your own, pulling you into their nightmarish reality. Ito's storytelling is so immersive that you don't just observe the horror, you experience it. By the time you reach the end, where the story relinquishes any hope of escape, the feeling isn't one of exhilaration, but of resignation and surrender. The manga combines psychological horror with grotesque body horror, drawing on elements reminiscent of Stephen King's Domestic Fears and Wes Craven's reality-bending gore to create something truly unique. Junji Ito, the author, believes that the horror resonates so well because it twists symbols that are usually associated with hope into something deeply sinister and frightening. When Uzumaki was first released, it quickly earned acclaim and became widely recognized as Junji Ito's definitive work, his magnum opus. Since then, Ito has built a strong reputation as a horror writer with exceptional talent, known for his ability to transform the ordinary into surreal nightmare. From eerie stories like the enigma of Amigata Fault to quirky twists on everyday life in Junji Ito's cat diary Yon and Mu, Ito has a knack for uncovering the unsettling elements lurking beneath the surface of our world. Like we already mentioned, the success of Uzumaki led to its adaptation into a Japanese live-action film in 2000 and inspired 2 video games for the Bandai WonderSwan. The story has also been reprinted in various collections of Ito's work. Now, the upcoming 4-episode anime series marks the first time Uzumaki will be brought to life through animation, offering a new way to experience its chilling and imaginative horror. Uzumaki's Spiral into Horror is a highly anticipated attempt to faithfully bring Junji Ito's unsettling story to life. Animated by the Japanese studio Drive and co-produced by Production IG USA and Adult Swim's Williams Street, it's set to air on Toonami by the end of this month. The team behind it has worked hard to stay true to the original manga, even going so far as adopting a grayscale color scheme to perfectly capture Ito's distinctively creepy aesthetic. The anime feels like a love letter to the fans, with its main focus on upholding Ito's signature style on the screen rather than reinterpreting it. While some critics argue that direct adaptations like this, similar to DC's animated Watchmen, can feel redundant if they don't offer anything new, Uzumaki still has the potential to introduce Ito's unique brand of body horror to a much broader audience. By sticking closely to the original, it aims to immerse new viewers in the haunting world of Kurotsucho. Is the curse of the spiral real? Although the decision to adapt Junji Ito's Uzumaki into a 4-episode series was taken in 2019, the production apparently faced repeated delays, which the animation team now jokingly refers to as the curse of the spiral, simply because in the original manga, the spiral started appearing on the sky, rivers, and clouds before manifesting on people's bodies. Jason DeMarco, who's the executive producer of the series and senior vice president of anime and action at Adult Swim, explained that the team took their time in pre-production to make sure the adaptation did justice to the manga's legacy. But when COVID-19 hit in 2020, production came to a sudden halt, and it remained that way for almost a year. Because the crew was so small, many people lost their loved ones, which was a huge blow to the team's morale. Jason DeMarco even shared that, as a precaution, the production team even performed a blessing at a shrine to ward off any supernatural forces. But as he humorously noted, it unfortunately didn't work as the staff truly felt like their project was cursed. According to them, it was a miracle that they even managed to finish production. Everyone who worked on the show, creating spiral after spiral for the animation, sometimes even sees spirals in plain sight. Now, that's creepy indeed, but despite all these challenges, the final version of Adult Swim's Uzumaki stays true to Junji Ito's iconic art style, as the animation team blended traditional hand-drawn animation with motion capture to accurately capture his intricate line work. Jason DeMarco explained that his goal was to get as close as possible to that truly unsettling feeling Ito creates in his work, which hadn't really been seen in his previous adaptations. So, even if producing the show in black and white caused a lot of production issues, the result was well worth it. Junji Ito's obsession with spirals. Junji Ito is a celebrated Japanese manga artist and writer for all the right reasons. He's known for his mastery of the horror genre, and in recent years, his work has gained international recognition, reaching people far beyond the typical manga readers. Influenced by legendary Japanese horror creators like Kazuo Umetsu and Hideshi Hino, as well as Western icons like H.P. Lovecraft, H.R. Giger, and Salvador Dali, Ito has created some of the most terrifying and surreal stories ever put to paper. He usually plays with grotesque body horror, suspense, and supernatural terror in his works, while also tapping into everyday fears, whether it's something as simple as the anxiety of dealing with uncontrollable acne or something as heavy as confronting the inevitability of death. This balance between the horrifyingly surreal and the deeply human is what makes his stories resonate so strongly with readers worldwide. Being his magnum opus, Uzumaki features some of Ito's most iconic and haunting imagery, where everything seems connected to one strange pattern of the spiral. As the story unfolds and the townspeople become either terrified or obsessed with spirals in increasingly disturbing ways, Shuichi's family is particularly affected after his father becomes so fixated on spirals that his body is later found twisted into one, crammed inside a circular coffin. Following this, Shuichi's mother is overwhelmed by fear and stabs herself in the ear after realizing that the human cochlea is spiral-shaped. The story then spirals further into madness, with each chapter ramping up the intensity of the body horror. The craziest part might be when one of Kiri's classmates, who has a scar on her forehead, watches in horror as it morphs into a spiral vortex which gradually pulls her entire body inward like an imploding black hole. As the story progresses, even time itself is twisted by the spiral curse, with the entire town of Kurotsucho falling deeper into the grip of this mysterious force. By the end, Kiri and Shuichi, the last two survivors, realize that escape is impossible and choose to hold each other tightly as their bodies intertwine, becoming one final spiral to close in on the haunting symbol of the inevitable power that consumed their town. Now, Junji Ito's inspiration for using the spiral pattern in Uzumaki came from his desire to flip its usual cheerful portrayal in the mainstream media. In many Japanese comedy cartoons, spirals are often seen on characters' cheeks as a playful symbol, an indicator of blushing or even inebriation. But Ito wanted to reimagine it in a darker, more unsettling context, turning something so familiar into a source of ultimate horror. He drew inspiration from H.P. Lovecraft's atmospheric style, where characters are haunted and terrorized by abstract, mysterious forces, which gave Ito the idea to use the spiral in a way that would evoke terror rather than lightheartedness. An Uzbekistani artist and art curator once described the spiral as representing the rhythm of life. To them, it symbolized the creative energy that drives both individuals and society. The spiral reflects the unity across generations and signifies spiritual and moral growth. For them, it embodies life's natural order, serving as a symbol of continuity, development, and motion. At its core, the spiral also represents a journey into the unknown, capturing the essence of exploration and progress. On the other hand, Vincent van Gogh's iconic painting, Starry Night, with its swirling night sky and flame-like cypress tree, beautifully captures this connection between life and death, heaven and earth, and the finite and the infinite. The cypress tree, often seen as a symbol of death, does not carry a sense of foreboding in Van Gogh's work. For him, death wasn't something dark or threatening, but a natural part of existence, seamlessly woven into the vibrant energy of the cosmos. In a letter to his brother, Van Gogh expressed the idea that looking at the stars always made him dream. He suggested that the shining dots in the sky should be as accessible as the black dots on a map, and just as one might take a train to reach a destination like Tarascon or Rouen, death could be seen as a journey to reach a star. But it's important to note that Starry Night was painted by Van Gogh from memory while he was confined to an asylum due to his deteriorating mental health. The following year, it was reported that he died from a gunshot wound inflicted on himself 2 days prior. For Junji Ito, he saw spirals as symbols of infinity. This perspective is clearly reflected in the eternal nature of the spiral curse in the final pages of Uzumaki, which depict a continuous cycle of destruction and reconstruction, as well as death and rebirth. Sure, the spiral pattern is mysterious, abstract, and even terrifying, but as Ito depicts, it is intricately tied to human existence, both in life and death. The fictional horror of Uzumaki's spirals and their impact on the townspeople is seen as reflecting a real-world parallel, where mental illness affects 1 in 4 people during their lifetime, entrapping individuals in their own kind of spiral. The psychological representation of the spiral in real life. As you must have figured out by now, Junji Ito stories usually start with the ordinary but quickly descend into supernatural and monstrous madness, often ending with unresolved mysteries. From the opening chapters of Uzumaki to its bittersweet conclusion, a sense of dread is maintained, both physically and existentially. The impact of the spiral on people's emotions and behaviors is particularly reflected in Shuichi. After his father's death in Chapter 1, Shuichi becomes increasingly gaunt as he starts to look starved and sleep-deprived. His hair looks shaggy and unkempt, his cheekbones stand out more due to malnutrition, and dark, swollen circles form under his eyes from a lack of proper sleep. Throughout the story, he is seen to be in a constant state of fear and paranoia while displaying erratic and manic behavior. Shuichi was clearly showing many signs of depression, which drove him to pull away from his friends and isolate himself from society. By the later chapters, he falls into a catatonic state, obsessively repeating the phrase, "This town is going mad." In a similar sense, in the 21st century, depression has become a widespread issue, affecting over 300 million people around the world, making it the leading cause of ill health. Psychologists often describe depression as a downward spiral where thoughts, emotions, and behaviors feed off of each other, creating a vicious cycle. One common form is the emotional spiral, where negative thoughts lead to a drop in mood, which in turn makes your thoughts even more negative and your emotions sink even lower. Another type is the social spiral. When you're feeling low, you might start withdrawing from social activities. This isolation leaves you with more time to dwell on your negative feelings, and without support from others, you end up feeling even more depressed. Then there's the physical spiral, where you feel exhausted, your body hurts, and it's hard to muster the energy to do anything that might lift your mood. But without physical activity to boost your endorphins, your mood continues to decline. Lastly, there's the pessimistic spiral. When you're trapped in this circle, you expect the worst and start believing that nothing you do will change anything. This leads to a sense of helplessness and resignation, where you end up feeling stuck in despair, much like Shuichi at the very bottom of the pit. It's as if time stands still, and the feeling of dread and hopelessness is endless. But the good news is that not all spirals have to be downward, and there is also an upward spiral that can help lift you out of your depression and enhance your life with happiness and fulfillment. By increasing positive emotions, you can trigger this upward spiral and start moving toward a better, more flourishing life, and when you're feeling good, things are more likely to go well. Ultimately, instead of sinking into a downward spiral of emptiness, positive psychology can help us rise through an upward spiral, leading us to a life filled with happiness, meaning, and purpose. Before Junji Ito became a renowned manga creator, he worked in dentistry. He literally had to choose between his promising career as a dental technician or fully committing to his passion for horror manga. Luckily for us, he chose to follow his creative instincts and dove into writing and illustrating horror comics. As one critic once put it, he traded in the real-life horrors of dentistry for the fictional ones of his stories. In doing so, he found his positive spiral, very glass-half-full ideology. Anyways, now that Uzumaki's Spiral into Horror is releasing on the 28th of September, we're really rooting for it. But what do you guys think? Will the anime live up to the manga's hype? Is such a thing even possible? Let us know about your opinions in the comments section down below, and if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. This is Wizard Wheezy signing off for now, but thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.